so glad you're here. Bringing Back Broadway is an initiative under Council District 14, which began 6 or 7 years ago. And Bringing Back Broadway's goal is to steer development, public and private development on Broadway, as only elected officials can steer public and private development, as we talked about lectures. Last year, about a year ago, beginning of March, last 2013, the City Planning Commission approved bringing back the Broadway Master Streetscape Plan. And about 10 months ago, City Council approved $1 million for Phase 1, Strategy 1, which is a series of temporary reorganization of Broadway as a street. The Department of Transportation is involved in putting the street on a road diet. And in the context of this road diet, 4 lanes of traffic down to 3, 2 northbound, 1 southbound. They want to put in parklets. I'm just going to say all this very quickly and then take a breath and come back. So we here, Kim and I, LAVA, I'm really concerned about Broadway because Broadway. Oh, Tom Sitton was. Everyone was here for the talk, right? Tom's talk. Tom wrote the National Register application for Broadway, right? He just took it. So it's really complicated. Broadway is a really interesting street. It's the best example of 19th century architecture in Los Angeles as a vista, not just a single building, but an environment. It's all private property. Thank goodness it's not been seized by eminent domain by the CRA like Bunker Hill was, right, Gordon, and turned into a dead corporate zone.
They turned it into the new blight.
Yeah, exactly. So Broadway, from a preservationist standpoint, is a really complicated topic. You've got intersections, you've got federal Section 106 legislation, which comes into play because it's a National Historic Register neighborhood, but none of that matters comes into play unless federal dollars are at work. And the reason Bringing Back Broadway, this initiative within CD14, is so interested in talking about this as a National Register district is the streetcar will only happen if there's federal funding to come in and help, because the city of Los Angeles can't afford to put in a streetcar. The fact that the CRAs don't exist anymore means that no cities in the state of California know how to develop infrastructure without a CRA. So when people talk about Broadway as a National Register neighborhood, as a National Register district, it's sort of like as the Panzer divisions rolled in Poland. It's a piece of paper. In September 39, it's a piece of paper, right? The treaty preventing the Panzers from going to Poland. It's just a piece of paper. Our concerns with preservation at a municipal level, we're going to go and walk on Broadway. None of the terrazzo sidewalks that we'll see can be preserved as municipal historic cultural monuments. A lot of people have been screaming at Ken Bernstein to do this, and Ken Bernstein, who's head of historic resources, will not sanction a path for terrazzo sidewalks to be preserved. So when the city begins, as it has, Phase 1, Strategy 1 of tearing up sidewalks to put Broadway on a road diet, and the notion of putting in just like so there are a lot of moving targets on Broadway. What's really interesting in the past year, up until a year ago, if you asked me the salient feature of Broadway, for 30 years, the only answer was 90% of the buildings, the floors above the ground floor are all vacant. Because the property owners back in the 70s figured out they could get comparable to Rodeo Drive for square footage on Broadway. Up through the 90s, this was a giant shock. Up till the aughts, this was it was a huge economic engine. Now, all the upper floors are starting to be built out and developed for redevelopment as residential. So it's really, really interesting. In the last year, that's changed. In the last year, we've been going on these walking tours, and all the upper floors are open. The windows are open. You can see dust. You hear, and so Broadway is just really complicated and really interesting. And I openly question the process that CD14 is doing with bringing back Broadway. I don't care if people in CD14 don't like that, but I openly question it. And I just really, we're doing these tours to raise consciousness. There's a mailing list for this list. At some point in the next 6 months, I'm going to mail to it, send out a mailing to it, and ask you to write Jessica Wethington McLean, who heads up the Bringing Back Broadway initiative, what you think about Broadway. And that's all we can do. The last thing I will say in the abstract is it is unclear if Broadway will be part of the new Mayor Eric Garcetti's Great Streets initiative. We are advocating with the people in charge of that in the mayor's office to confirm if Broadway is part of the Great Streets initiative. I hope it is, and I think I will be less anxious if Broadway becomes part of that Great Streets initiative, only because that means more people will be involved in the feedback loop. And again, I'm going to say something that some people may not like, but at this point, the only person in the feedback loop for public feedback on what the city's doing for Broadway right now is bringing back Broadway. And I just find that that's like, there are 3 departments involved, and I call all of them, and they all tell me, oh, you should just talk to Jessica. And I feel if this becomes part of the Great Streets initiative, then there are deputy mayors that can be involved to oversee the stuff. Gordon, do you want to tell people what your parents' experience on Broadway was immediately during World War II and immediately after, just as a way to get our heads around what this street used to be? This is Gordon's family on the last 2 structures on Old Bunker Hill, the salt box, and the castle. The CRA took the homes, their eminent domains, with everything else, but they were slated and moved Heritage Square, but they burned down through vandalism about 4 months after the move.
Right.
But that's another tour. Tell us about your parents and Broadway.
Okay. Yeah, my father grew up on Bunker Hill, moved to Los Angeles in 1932 when he was 8 years old. His mother bought the castle in 1937 and the house next door, and she ended up being a landlady to 60 rooms up there on Bunker Hill in a fairly short period of time. And unfortunately, she got pneumonia and died in 1943 on her birthday. My dad was drafted into World War II and met my mother during the war. They got married, they had me, and came back to Los Angeles, well, on their honeymoon actually. And he took her to Clifton's for dinner. So we have a Clifton's connection. And when they had me, and we came back after the war and settled up on Bunker Hill. And I lived there. My earliest childhood memories are of Bunker Hill. And when I was a small child in the late 1940s, my parents would leave me up there with our on-site manager, Ollie Harp, and they'd come down here to Broadway and go to the movies. My mother wrote a diary from the time right after the war until about 1949. And so I know this from that. They came down here to Broadway and went to the movies 2 and 3 times a week because there's no TV. And the movie palaces were all busy. And so they come down. And I even remember as a small child coming down here with them and going to the movies. And I remember Broadway when it was thick with people. The sidewalks were thick with people, and there were streetcars out there. All of the big flagship.
There were streetcars that actually went to places.
Oh yeah.
As opposed to the streetcar they're proposing, which goes to LA Live and back to LA Live.
Well, yeah, we had the best interurban light rail system in the world in Los Angeles. So yeah, you could go from way down in Orange County or Long Beach all the way up to Mount Lowe, and you could go from Santa Monica all the way to San Bernardino on light rail. Anyway, all of the big department stores had their flagship headquarters. The Phillips is right across the street down here in the corner, and everybody went shopping here. I remember distinctly, you couldn't walk more than a few paces without having to walk around somebody because there was that many people on the sidewalks, and everybody did their shopping down here. It was a remarkable place, and I hope someday it comes back to be a remarkable place.
I think it is, and I think that's the thing I love most about the promise of Broadway is the community redevelopment agency is not involved, and all the buildings are privately owned, which means every single landlord, and these are all These are all people who've been waiting for their properties to improve. Grandfather, a long tradition of working with property owners in my family who've been waiting 40 years for, anyway. It's a very interesting scenario, and I look forward to it. All right, we're going to talk about Claud Beelman. I just, before we get out into the busy traffic, maybe make 2 minutes of points here. Okay. Wow, Claud Beelman really designed a lot of buildings downtown, like a lot. And I just he's the last great. We just, every 6 months we do new walking tours, and it's like wow, Claud Beelman really did a lot. We're going to look at Claud Beelman, American architect, born in the 1880s, came to Los Angeles from Ohio about just before World War I, and right after World War I began in private practice as an architect. Alec Kirtlet, an English architect, was his first partner, and all of his early work was with Alec Kirtlet. We're going to look at Claud Beelman buildings that date from a building he built when he designed when he was in his 70s. At 6th and Spring, we'll just peek down Spring. We'll peek down 6th to Spring, the California Bank Tower, which is the first building built after removal of the city's height limit laws. The height limit laws, 13 stories, were repealed in '57, and Beelman's client, California Bank, knew this, and they went to building and safety and filed for a permit 3 days after the laws were repealed. So that anyway, beautiful structure, covered in marble, and of course, the current owner decided to paint it. Absolute genius. Absolute genius. This tour is all about utter geniuses. We're going to look at the Garfield building. We're going to get off Broadway and just walk over to Hill for a minute, because there are 3 buildings at 6th and Hill, right off of Pershing Square, two of which are Beelman and one of which were influenced by Beelman. So it's just kind of interesting to look at these 3 buildings, north to south, 3 buildings on Hill that definitely were all shaped by Beelman explicitly, because he was the architect of the last one. Harrison Frank Clothing redesigned really to complement these 2 Beelman buildings that have just been done. And then we'll end up at 8th and Broadway, and we'll talk about the Eastern. We'll talk about the 9th and Broadway building. And before we get to the last 2, we'll swing by the Garfield at Hill and talk about the Garfield building, which is the saddest building in the entire world. And these are all Claud Beelman buildings. And don't let me forget our good friend John Kilduff, the painting guy, will be doing a plein air painting session waiting for us.
Where is he? Where will we
He's south
find him?
of here. He's somewhere between here and 9th.
We're gonna find him.
We're gonna find him. So keep a lookout for a guy with an easel, right? A plein air painter. Okay, he's excited. He'll be there till 4, and we're gonna find him. Yes.
Going back to
Anything. I talked really
Now, I
fast.
understand, as far as the sidewalks on Broadway and everything, is part of what they're proposing to widen the streets so the sidewalks are smaller? Is that
Well, what's happening, okay, and this is the one thing I didn't say, and I should have said it, but I just talked very quickly because I want to get us out of here. So what's happening is that CD14 is using the work of a dean at the Public Affairs School, the Luskin Public Affairs School at UCLA. Her name is Anastasia Lukaitis-Sidiris, and she's done a series of studies about parklets, some of which work very well in other places. She's done a series of studies about the parklets on Spring Street, and there are parklets in South LA. The point of parklets is to take a street which is dead and activate the sidewalk with using parking spaces as a temporary measure to get people back onto that sidewalk to activate the sidewalk. And what what Bringing Back Broadway fails to understand in my discussions with them is that parklets, as proposed and implemented per the studies that Anastasia's done, is parklets are temporary. They're like supposed to be up for 6 months or a year, and people will just come back in and start to use the street. And CD14 thinks that these parklets are just going to be part of the landscape of Broadway for the next 10 years.
How do you define a parklet?
A parklet is this space, and the department, the DOT, the Department of Transportation, actually implemented its pilot program 2 months ago, where as a citizen of Los Angeles, you can fill out an online form and say, I want to convert the parking space in front of my cafe into a parklet. You fill out the form, give the location, give suggested uses, get a couple other people to fill out the form and click on the same parcel number so they know you're talking about this these 3 parking spaces, and if they approve it, and the approval process is supposed to take only 6 weeks, so it's supposed to happen very quickly, the city then sends in a crew with a pre-planned template for parklet, and there's a choice of 3 different parklet designs. So obviously they've worked with the manufacturer who has 3 different designs, and they have 200 of each ready, and they've sold them to the city, and they're sitting in a warehouse waiting for DOT workers to go in and take over these 3 parking spaces and put in these outer round neck chairs or foosball tables or exercise bicycles. And the exercise bicycles interest me because it's all part of federal subsidies for exercise, which don't really contribute to the positive public space, but get the council district extra funding from the federal government because they put up exercise bicycles in parking spaces. And that's a trick Ira Yellen taught everyone when he redid Grand Central Square in the late 90s. Did I answer your question?
Not completely. So does
Keep going.
the parklet take up the space where the 3 cars
Yes,
go?
the parklet
Or does it take up any of the sidewalk?
It doesn't take up, no, it doesn't take up any of the sidewalk. There are templates for parklets that can take up not sidewalks, but spaces in the street that aren't used for parking spaces.
You see the white lines.
Yeah.
You can see them painted.
Yeah, we'll see them as, yeah. I think the best thing
I'm
at
just
this point,
wondering, so why
well,
are
I'm
you-
going to point, so why am
Why is
I,
a terrazzo in danger?
oh, because at some point, phase 1, strategy 1, which are these temporary measures, will end, and if they find phase 1, strategy 1 was a success, then they're going to want to actually tear up the sidewalks and take out lanes of traffic. And at that point, our concern about many things is like,
Traffic. I live on Broadway, I'm not.
it's okay. Oh, one last thing.
But you can see the parklets on Spring Street, though. They're just a block over.
Right,
So if you wanted to see what they look
the
like.
parklets on Spring Street, I think, work because Spring is a very different street. 4 years ago, CD14 began working with the MTA, and last July they diverted 70% of bus traffic off of Broadway onto Hill and Spring. And I think that's egregious because one of the things that makes positive public space is a transfer point, and it's no longer a transfer point if you get off the bus and you have to walk 2 blocks to catch your bus. The transfer point is you get off the bus and you stand there still with your transfer and you wait and you turn 90 degrees and you get on the bus, and they've destroyed that. So what they're saying is they don't care about poor people on Broadway, which of course we know. They don't care about poor people on Broadway, which is the hidden context that I just explicitly put on the table, and my wife is cringing that I've said that. But really,
I'm shrugging actually because it's true.
it's true.
I'm not cringing.
It's all really sad, and it's really annoys me that they're using public policy documents out of the Luskin School of Public Affairs to perpetuate that they're misrepresenting them. These parklets are not meant. Broadway is not supposed to have for 10 years parklets. Spring Street isn't. They're supposed to activate the street, show that people want to get back on the sidewalk, and make them parking spaces again because the cafe owners have applied for permits and set up sidewalk tables, or they already have them. So it just annoys me that they want to destroy Broadway for the sake of parklets, which are temporary and not supposed to be a permanent part of the physical landscape of Broadway. And I think they do it because, there's one last thing, and then we have to start walking. I really think that at some level there's some gauge that CD14 has, and they want to show that they're reducing the amount of parking spaces in downtown under their aegis. And I think like with the parklets, they can then at some point 3 years from now say, well look, we've taken the number of parking lots in Broadway from 60% to 50%. And they have no control over the privately owned parking lots. So they can't make property owners take their incredibly lucrative investments, which is an outdoor parking lot, and turn it into a parklet, because they would say, well, take here are the keys to my building. I can't make any money off of it anymore. So it's interesting. We have to start walking. Are there any other questions?
What does the Conservancy say?
I don't know. I mean, really, honestly, okay, my latest conversation with the Conservancy. Hi, Conservancy, you gave Bell Gardens a decent rating on conservation. Why did you do that? Well, Richard, they have a landmark ordinance. And I said, they don't have a landmark ordinance. So you're spending all this time telling me that Bell Gardens has a landmark ordinance, and they don't. But this has nothing to do with...
My question was about related to the preservation of these movie palaces.
Right.
And their involvement in that.
They make a lot of money on last remaining seats, which is a great fundraiser for them. I don't understand the Conservancy. I think they're very political. I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. I think the Conservancy has their shtick with glass remaining seats, which functions only because 6 projectionists who have access to the type of projectors you need to have to rent an archival quality print from a motion picture studio agree to do last remaining seats, and I met all of them at a party. And the only reason last remaining seats exist is these 6 guys enjoy doing this, and they're in the good graces of the Conservancy, and there's goodwill, which is good, which is what I want. But that's
So
the Conservancy works because they pay movie theater owners to let people into the movie theaters for their Saturday walking tours, which I can't do because I just don't have the resources and I don't want to form.
What is your question about the Conservancy?
Well, they haven't taken a position yet
On Broadway.
on Broadway.
No, they have. They support bringing back Broadway. The Conservancy has given a green light to the Broadway Master Streetscape plan. They have. They've given their stamp of approval. Back in 2009, all of this feedback happened 5 years ago. 5 years ago. Let's start walking. Yeah, it's all 5 years ago. Neighborhoods. All right, so we're just going to start walking. That's the United California Bank Tower. Started in 1957. Claud Beelman was 70 years old when he was given that contract. So this is the latest building of his we'll talk about by 30 years. But this is the building where they filed the permit with Building and Safety a week after they removed the height limit ordinance. So from about 1915 to 1957, there were height limit ordinances in Los Angeles, and the only building that could be over 13 stories was City Hall. And so they cleared it, and Beelman was contracted to put up the California Bank Tower building. What's awful is that the building is clad in marble, and it's been painted. And it's just awful, and we can't see the south side of the building, and we don't as a group have time to walk to the south side, but the current owner punched a bunch of holes into the marble so people could have balconies. And it just ruins the building, which is a really I'm not a late modern guy, but it's a beautiful building. It was a beautiful building, and I think they've really what's interesting about the building they've ruined. And the light's going to change. We're going to head 1 block north to Hill and talk about 4 buildings in a row, all right next to each other. So let's go. And someone needed water, and I'll get you water when we get to 6th Street. Okay. Let's get a little closer because we're going to be looking at these 3 buildings in rapid succession. Yeah, looking south. So let's just get to the edge of the shade. Yeah, perfect. All right. Let's come out into the sun. We're going to get a better view because we're going to walk south to back to 7th, but let's just start here. So, Pershing Square. Consolidated building, originally constructed 1907. Harrison Albright, San Francisco architect. We're going to ignore the incredibly ugly parking lot. Between it, we have the slate green terracotta tile structure, and then just south of that, we have the beige Harrison Frank or London Clothing Company. We'll get much better views of everything as we walk down the block, but I want to start here. So, by 1940, the consolidated building had been remodeled by Claud Beelman. The remodel was 1935, and Claud Beelman remodeled it with architectural terracotta from Gladding McBean. The slate green building, the Sun Realty building, is Claud Beelman. That was 1930. That is clad in architectural Gladding terracotta from Gladding McBean. So what happened is, the Sun Realty company is built. It's this we'll see it closer when we get a little closer. It's this gorgeous slate green emerald. The consolidated building, which is at that point 30 years old, the owners say, let's go ahead and let's remodel the consolidated building. I can't find a photo, but I will find a photo eventually. They skin it in an architectural terracotta similar to the Sun Realty building, And then at that point, at some point between 1930 and 1940, I have to go to building and safety and pull the permits on it. But the Brown building, the Harris Frank building, which we'll see much better in a couple minutes, the building just south of the Emerald building, they remodeled their 1917 building to what it is now, which is Claud Beelman architectural terracotta with the streamlined design. So by 1940, you have 3 buildings almost in a row, which are basically because of Claud Beelman. You have the Consolidated building, which is remodeled. The Consolidated, the building on the corner, the Consolidated Realty building that you see today, was remodeled in 1967. And they removed the Beelman remodel. Don't take my picture. The California Jewelry Mart. The California Jewelry Mart was remodeled in '67 to its current facade, and they removed all the Beelman 1935 restoration. You have 3 buildings basically in a row, which were either designed by Beelman or deeply impacted by the two northern buildings. So what I'd like to do when this light changes in about 10 seconds is stay on this side of the street, and we'll just take individual looks at the building.
Are we going to see my door?
Yes, and we're going to see your door.
Thank you.
Okay, now let's walk almost to the traffic signal.
Oh, you're going to have to point it out. We're going to have to stop at my door.
Wait, that's right. I'm sorry. We'll go. We're right here.
But the William Fox building?
Yeah.
Oh, hey, hello.
I'll introduce this.
All right.
Okay.
Is this
All
your
right.
door?
The door. A girl in her door.
Photo opportunity. The special edition cover wrap for Kim's novel comes from details of this door. This is the William S. Fox building. You can all see the architect. It's Tilden S. Norton. Norton was related to the family that financed the building. He was actually the son of the man that financed the building with Fox, one of Fox's business partners. This is a great building. Fox, of course, had a lot, maybe not of course, Fox of 20th Century Fox fame had a lot to do with the Los Angeles Theater, which is directly behind this building on Broadway. And how he became involved and how he removed himself is long and complicated, and I only have another 15 seconds probably to talk about it. But Fox and the Los Angeles Theater are very interesting, and Kim, you picked the details from this door. So if people want to take a quick look at the door, this is what you used for the cover wrap for the special edition of your book. It's a great building, really beautiful purples. And of course, Claud Beelman did the architectural terracotta for this building, Joe.
I'm going to say that architectural terracotta was a really good investment. This stuff has held up.
Yeah, it really has.
McBean was like a terracotta manufacturer.
And they still are.
A ceramic tile manufacturer. All the large architectural terracotta was fabricated in Lincoln, up in Central California, and they're still there, and they have all the molds apparently. I haven't talked to anyone that's taken a large-scale mold to them and asked if they can pull it, but my understanding is they have all the molds still. They claim they've claimed to restoration architecture firms, if they bring them a sample, they can find the mold. I don't know of anyone that's done that with the architectural terracotta, but for their smaller stuff, they've done that successfully. All right, let's walk just across to the the Emerald building. Okay. So what I want everyone to understand is the California Jewelry Mart, the Consolidated building, at some point between in 1935, Claud Beelman was hired to reskin it, and it was reskinned in architectural terracotta, very similar to the Sun Realty building, the green building, the slate green building immediately behind me, and the Harris and Frank clothing company immediately to the south. Okay, so by 1935, 3 buildings almost back to back looked identical, and were very much, 2 of which were by Claud Beelman, and I've forgotten the name of the architect that did the brown, the beige building, because we're just doing Beelman today, and forgive me, but it was remodeled at some point between 1930 and 1935. And all right, so let's talk about architectural terracotta. Let's talk. Okay, the green building, the slate green terracotta building, immediately behind me is the Sun Realty building. There was a 2-story building in its place, and in 1928 they broke ground to build the building you see today. The building immediately to the south, the brown building, that's the Harris and Frank Clothing Company. It's also known as the London Clothing Company. Leopold Lefkowitz came to Los Angeles in the 1880s, and he changed his name to Harris. I'm sorry, Leopold Herskowitz. Leopold Herskowitz came to Los Angeles in the 1880s. He changed his name to Harris, and he took on a Gentile business partner, and they became Harris and Frank Clothiers. They're very successful. That building was originally constructed in 1917. It was their flagship. Dodd and Richards were the architects, and at some point between 1930 and 35, I have to go to Building and Safety and pull the records and look. They did the remodel where they reskinned it in this architectural terracotta, which is very much au courant in the early 1930s. Laddie McBean, at that point, by 1930, was the only one manufacturing this large-scale glazed architectural terracotta, and they did it really, really well. Anytime you see anything about any architectural terracotta in downtown, it's Laddie McBean. It has. I mean, there are one or two exceptions, but they did everything.
Hey Richard, is there a hashtag for this event?
There is a hashtag for this event. I forget. Broadway on my mind.
Broadway on my mind.
Broadway on my mind is the hashtag for this event. All right. Let's keep moving. Gordon, do you want to lead the way? And we'll go down to 7th, and we'll make a left. Broadway, and we'll look for John the Painter. Gothic Art Deco. Right? Gothic Art Deco. That's a real term? Yeah, that's the term they used in the press release. Gothic Art Deco. It's 1928. 1928, they called it Gothic Art Deco. No, that's what they called it, Gothic Art Deco. The clothing company that built the building is famous for not occupying the ground floor. You notice how there's almost a mezzanine level. The second level almost is like a mezzanine. The men's clothing store was that mezzanine level with the giant plate glass windows, and their slogan was, "You pay less because we're not on the ground floor." That was their slogan. They would finance these buildings in downtown areas, and they would put their store on the second floor with giant plate glass windows, and they would rent out the ground floor to tenants, and they would just make and that was their, you pay less because we're not on the ground floor. Yeah.
Makes me want to buy a suit, but I can't.
There's this really heavy white line that's called I forget. There's a term. Street engineers have this term. That's called a bottleneck, where they take out a lane just at the intersection to slow traffic down. So what they've done is they've bottlenecked the southeast corner of this intersection, and there's a heavy double white line that tapers out, and so potentially this incredibly busy intersection could become a parklet for people to sit in the middle of the street and be killed by a car making a right.
Do they have some rational reason for wanting to slow down the traffic?
No, they don't. Yes, they do. So the question is, so why does CD14 want to put Broadway on a road diet? Okay, so very quickly, the answer is, historically, there are neighborhoods which have been, in quotes, successfully gentrified. And I use that term very liberally and in quotes. An example would be 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica. And I remember Martin Sheen, just back from filming Apocalypse Now, taking his daughter and I to buy an Orange Julius and buying the 6 winos in front of Orange Julius's, before it was 3rd Street Promenade. 3rd Street Promenade in downtown Pasadena, Old Town Pasadena, have been gentrified successfully. Forget whether it works or not. They've gentrified. They've gentrified because there are wealthy communities around them. Okay? That's why Old Town Pasadena and Santa Monica 3rd Street Promenade work. There are no wealthy neighborhoods around downtown.
Except downtown is becoming incredibly expensive
it's
to live.
infiltrated, yeah.
Yes,
The people that live here.
It's
That's
pretty
the difference.
expensive, I think. But I don't know. But it's odd.
but it's not the paradigm. If you listen to what I'm saying, Old Town Pasadena gentrified because there are very wealthy bedroom communities immediately around it, and the same with Santa Monica.
With significantly higher populations than are in just downtown.
Right.
Yeah.
Road diets, once a neighborhood gentrifies like Old Town, the next thing the urban planners say is put it on a road diet. Slow down the traffic and people will increase in population. So what CD14 is promoting is put Broadway on a road diet in the hopes that what happened in Old Town Pasadena and the 3rd Street Promenade will happen here. And I agree with everyone that says downtown is becoming expensive. It is. But it's a different type of wealthy neighborhood than if you look at Old Town Pasadena, San Marino, Altadena, South Pasadena, Santa Monica with Brentwood, West Los Angeles, and the beach communities to the south. So, did I answer your question? Whoever, okay.
Apartments are going in upstairs.
And apartments are going in upstairs.
It's like here.
Taking away parking be a negative thing?
Right.
It's not even just parking, it's just getting through on the streets.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just crazy that what they're thinking of doing.
Yeah, it's just,
You've ever been around here at 6 p.m.
It's
It's
really
not pretty.
crazy. It's really crazy.
Yeah, I'd like to bring up, I live down
Yes,
here.
yes.
And I actually
Well, that's the
support
thing.
the
I think it's
idea.
a
Okay.
fair plan.
And here's
They're
why.
hoping for,
Not because I wanted to gentrify or bring more shopping,
down
but
here.
because
They're
I
doing rehab.
I think Broadway is dangerous
Okay. Yeah.
for pedestrians.
Yeah.
I walk down here all the time. These cars are going so fast, you would not believe it.
Yeah.
It's really scary.
Yeah.
And I think whatever they can do to slow down traffic down here and make it more pedestrian friendly will help. That's my two cents.
Very good. Very good.
I would actually agree with you that they go too fast, but I just think there's better ways to slow people down than
I think
what they're planning.
What I actually think would work is just the bottlenecking, where you just take out the lane immediately before and around the intersection. I think that historically has worked. I don't get the parklets on Broadway because people drive so fast. I just don't get the idea of I'm not going to sit in an unused lane of traffic in Broadway in a parklet. I'm just not.
I don't like the parklets on Spring.
Yeah, I just.
Right, nobody uses
It's
them.
supposed to be temporary.
I wish they were dog parks.
Well, they'd be better off taking planting trees. So there's the building that used to be gold later, right after Family Pants. See the white of Family Pants? It's the next is beige. That was the gold rim.
And the one next to it,
Oh yeah,
that's been like that.
that's been like that. I mean, this one, it had the bricks in the window. It definitely needed to be fixed, but it was a single large window with the beautiful stone. I think it's marble, and then a rim of gold. I don't know if they sold it, if they painted over it, what they did. They put these weird little awnings.
Terrazzo.
That is terrible.
It's what are you gonna do? Where's the conservancy?
This is the.
Bad taste. And no supervision. Yeah.
No, this is not a movie theater. This is a terrazzo. Terrazzo sidewalks. Right? Terrazzo sidewalks. It was not a theater. It was a clothing store. Yes. So a lot of businesses in the 30s put terrazzo in. This has been a real concern with Art Deco Society, for example, is a nonprofit, preservation nonprofit that has been talking to Ken Bernstein. I personally have been, and there's no path, according to Ken Bernstein, to get a nomination to the Historic Cultural, the CHC, the Historic Cultural Commission, Historic Cultural Commission, to landmark this terrazzo. And so concerns that I have and a lot of people have is, you want to put Broadway in a road diet and you want to start taking lanes of traffic out. If you start jackhammering the concrete curb right here, what do you do to the terrazzo? And there's no, and the answer given is, well, Jessica will take care of it. That's literally the answer you get.
Who's
is
Jessica?
Jessica Weathy McLean is in charge of bringing back Broadway. Okay, so I think that's a crummy preservation ordinance. But that's the answer, is Jessica's on top of it.
Do you want to talk about what's behind you?
I want to get a little closer.
Okay.
So just a sad sad side note, this is not about Claud Beelman, but the building with the gray stucco in the center of it with the white trim. So this building, this used to be an automobile lot, and in 1924 they built a 4-story structure. In 1937 the structure was remodeled, and up until about a month ago there was a solid giant border of gold trim around the edge of the building. It looked like a giant picture frame. And they put the scaffolding up about 6 months ago, and I kept calling the number and no one ever answered. And they took the scaffolding down about a month ago, and the giant gold leaf trim is gone. Why would anyone do that? Why would you do that? It was like literally 2 feet wide. It was like a giant picture frame.
Are you sure they're not going to be putting it back up?
It's gone.
Is it covered up or is it removed? It's gone.
At least they left the green marble.
It's gone.
They probably did sell it.
There's a possibility of that.
Yeah.
It's hard to recover.
Yeah.
Gold leaf like that.
Yeah.
Too expensive.
Yeah, they sold it. Anyway, just sad. So scaffolding just came down. Gold leaf is gone.
But this is supposed to be a National Register district.
No,
so
but I don't know if that building's a contributing building.
But if it is,
Yeah, but I have to look.
yeah, we're
If
gonna look.
there are buildings on Broadway in the district that are non-contributing buildings.
Well, that certainly is now
But
non-contributing.
it doesn't matter because it's not a city landmark. So it's really at Ken Bernstein's discretion if he's gonna do anything, and I'm sure they did. You know, they applied for a permit in building and safety. It didn't get flagged because it's a non-contributing building probably. I have to look it up tonight if it's a non-contributing building.
Do you know anything unique about the Ross?
Oh, that used to be a Woolworths. That began life as a Woolworths. It got a major facade remodel in 1934. Before it was Woolworths, it was a drugstore, but it was constructed in the right after World War I, and just a classic Beaux-Arts facade. And Woolworths came in and gave it a very Art Deco facade in 34.
It still looks brand
I'm sorry?
new. It still looks up to date,
Yeah,
except for the Rosses.
except for the Ross.
Yeah.
And the inside's got it.
Well, of course.
The inside did. Yeah, the stairway's pretty. Yeah.
I've heard that Ross is leaving already.
Yes, that's what I heard too.
The building's for sale, so I don't know if they bought
I
it.
thought it was the Needlemans, but I called them and they said no.
I want this building.
Okay. This is not Claud Beelman, but they're starting to clean it, and we're here, so I'm going to talk about it. This is the Merrill building. This is the Merritt building, as in the Merritt College in Pasadena. Yeah, the very wealthy Pasadena family. This building is 1914. It's supposed to be a model of the Parthenon in Athens. And the reason it looks kind of weird is that it was designed to be 3 stories higher, so it had proper entasis. There was proper proportion to the height of the column, to the rest of the proportions of the building, but City Council refused to grant them a exclusion for the height ordinance, so they were forced to bring down the height of the building, and so the proportions aren't it's not classical. It's not classically proportioned, so it doesn't quite look like the Parthenon. But it
That's
was
the Hollywood Parthenon, is what that is.
it's the first all-clad marble building in Los Angeles.
And they have marble sidewalks too.
Yeah, and they have a marble sidewalk,
It's very slippery
which
when
is
wet.
yes, it is. But it's a beautiful building, and in the basement they used to have, up until 1960, a 24-hour vault. So if you were a business downtown and you were a 24-hour business, of which there were many, you would just send someone over with a couple big guys every 8 hours, and you could just put your cash in a deposit box, and the next day the accountant could go over at 9 in the morning and walk it over to the bank. And this 24-hour vault existed through the 60s. And the vault was a core part of the store when it opened in 1914. And it also had a giant department store on the first, second, and third floor that Mr. Merritt started. And it was Regency. The theme was Adams, which is later than Regency. It's
Yes.
like
Early 1800s.
yeah, early English 1800s theme, and it was very specific. And so these are just some of the great things lost. And someone bought it, and I don't know how they're cleaning it without scaffolding, but they are. can see that's been cleaned. That edge, the southern edge has been cleaned. And I don't know how they did it. I haven't seen any scaffolding. I know. I haven't seen any.
Your job is to keep an eye on the photo.
Yeah, so I don't know how they cleaned it, but they're cleaning it.
There are gremlins up there.
I have not seen anybody up there.
Exactly.
Painter's here. We found the painter. He's painting the Merrill building. This is like the greatest building in the world. There's supposed to be an auditorium on the 5th floor. All these buildings south of here, they were all music stores and they all had auditoriums. Like 300, 400 person auditoriums. And all these buildings, these are all music buildings, music stores. And they all had auditoriums.
Oh, okay. No.
It's great to see you. You're well?
Yeah, I just kind of hurt my back.
Oh.
I'm kind of slow.
Okay, but you're moving, and that's when you hurt your back and you can still move.
I've been painting so much that I pulled a muscle or something. I think.
Okay. Let's hope Everyone, I'd like to introduce you to John. John is a plein air painter, and he's a friend of ours, and I fondly remember being able to pay him to paint when I was director of the downtown Los Angeles Art Walk. I would contribute. I would subsidize. We gave you money to paint because this is positive public space.
Bought a couple of houses.
Oh yeah, really? Perhaps you bought some beer with the.
That's about it.
Yeah, I didn't. But it was really great to be able to give people some financial incentive to come down and engage in activities which encourage positive realization. John, do you want to talk about what you do? I don't want to distract you from your painting too much, but
I've been painting basically, outdoors painting. They call it plein air painting. I've been doing it for 30 years. And I've actually been painting Broadway for basically 30 years also, because I went to Otis, part of the park in '83. So I used to come down here. So I used to come down here. I walk or bicycle down and paint Broadway. I used to do originally, watercolors, pastels. Now these predominantly I do oil.
yeah. So
I come in, off and on. I come down. Go out to the beach or I go somewhere else. Some other projects.
You have one gallery you work with?
I'm all over the place. eBay and that kind of stuff. But occasionally I'll have a show in a gallery.
Yeah. You had one in San Francisco not too long ago?
Yeah, there's a show in San Francisco, but it's not landscapes. They're actually record covers. I painted my record cover collection. But it's the same, it's sort of. I sort of take this approach to the excitement. Well, basically painting outdoors, as opposed to working from a photograph, is part of the excitement for me.
Yeah.
Since I've been doing it for 30 years, it's definitely it's hard to get away from it. In fact, I'll try to work from a photograph at home and love a landscape. I just I might get lucky and I might get it to work, but more times than not, it's not a good feeling. And coming out here is like, it's just a great, it's just exciting.
Yeah. So tell us, if you can verbalize, and in your what is your approach to capture the street?
Just being here and putting paint down and then go through your dog.
Blocking it out and then
blocking it. So now I'm sort of. I've done a lot of
blocked out the street.
Yeah, so I'm kind of working there, and now I'm starting, start putting windows in and detail. And I don't know if I'll even get it done today. I might have to come back another day. I started in a little bit. It's a large one too. This is 36 by 48. So most of the time people work small because that way you can get it done in an afternoon. No, I started it yesterday, so I was here for a couple hours yesterday, and now I've been here about an hour.
Sometimes Alex paints across the street from you.
Oh,
Alex and the Burning Cheese fame.
Yeah.
Alex Schaefer.
Schaefer. Yeah.
Alex Schaefer. Yeah. All right. Well, does anyone have any questions for John?
Is that acrylic?
No, it's oil.
Oil.
All right. All right.
Thank you.
John, we want to thank you.
Oh yeah, no problem. I mean, I've been meaning to come down here. I hadn't been down here in the past.
We saw you about a month ago.
Yeah.
We caught up with you.
So I've been kind of needing to build up my inventory or something.
Good.
Downtown.
Keep up the good
Sure.
work.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank John. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Where do you show your work?
Just on the internet and
I'll send you.
galleries. I give you a card. Or
Yeah,
something.
please. I told you to bring cards, and you did. Good, you listened to me. Some people don't.
I got like 5 or 6 of them out. And actually a couple more. Let's see. So you just go up and down Broadway mostly?
I've been doing this monthly Broadway walking tour for about a year because I have grave concerns about the Broadway Streetscape master
I
plan.
just found out that they're gonna make that a sidewalk up here. Is that that's or something? They're gonna put planters in for now.
Yeah, the idea is to turn. Yeah, they've got the
Parkland area?
Yeah, this is supposed to be a parkland area. Yeah. So,
And then they're gonna put a streetcar in too at the same time. That doesn't
I don't know about the streetcar. I don't know. We're not gonna hold our breath. We are in front of a really important building, which is not Claud Beelman, but I will talk about for a second. This is the old Hamburger's department store. This is Alfred Rosenheim, 1906. I will mention that I think this building just went into escrow, and I think it's the largest real estate deal in the county of Los Angeles in the last 50 years. What?
They're gonna make some condos out of it?
50 million? 500 million?
Yeah, I mean, there's like a bank's not doing the escrow.
It's only off
like
one order of magnitude.
like a country's doing the escrow. Like literally, a country's doing the escrow because a bank won't touch it. So
It's going to be a million.
this is a really big building, and it's over 1 million square feet. So Hamburger's department store. If it sells, whenever it sells, this is. I've talked to people in the CRA. The CRA doesn't exist anymore, but all the people I know in the CRA say, whatever happens here, so goes Broadway. So, like for instance, if Google moves in, like I know the mayor's office is actively advocating for Google to move in here.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, the mayor's office is actively advocating. Yeah.
Can they make it work though?
I don't know. I just know I've talked to Phil, the agent, the sales agent, and the mayor's office calls him every day. Like he gets calls every day from the mayor's office. Like, what's happening? How's it going? You going into escrow? Who's talking to you? What are the other people saying? Who's interested? Did Google call you back? Okay. This is a really important building.
Who currently owns
Let's go. I forget who currently owns it, but they've owned it for about 20 years. They've bought it about 20 years ago. Yeah, it's really interesting.
I separate myself from being out, in a weird way. Only because that way I can concentrate, and also sometimes you do get some kind of strange characters that are, you don't want to be all friendly with them necessarily, and you want to cut this discussion shorter than just go on and on and on. Yeah. So they usually more times than not, almost always, they realize you're busy painting and they leave you. That's good.
Metropolitan Theaters, who owned all of the movie theaters on Broadway at the time, and several other large property owners who owned large tracts of property on Broadway. And they gave Reverend Gene Scott they worked with Metropolitan Theaters to let him lease the United Artists, and eventually the CRA helped him purchase it. The United Artists is just, you see the blade sign? Yeah. That's where Gene Scott purchased the United Artists Theater because Okay, I'll spend a minute on this. So at 6th and Hope, where Hope dead ends at the library, there used to be a giant twin-towered Romanesque revival building called Church of the Open Door, where Biola University started. And in 1985, they left and they moved to Glendora. Gene Scott bought the building. He gave them $100,000 in cash and said, I'll give you another $500,000 over the next 2 years, and I'll get you a check really soon. And they're like, okay, great. And then there was an earthquake, and the building was condemned, and Gene Scott tried to sue the CRA for having building and safety condemn the building he didn't really own. And somehow the CRA correctly decided that if they just basically gave Gene Scott the United Artists, he would stop threatening to sue them over the Church of the Open Door, and they could demolish it, because apparently it was about to collapse, and they were concerned that it would literally collapse in the middle of the day and kill people.
Was that the Jesus
Church?
Saves?
Yeah, and I was just going to get to that. Church of the Open Door, if you don't know what I'm talking about, it was at the end of the library. It was the building that had the Jesus Saves signs. And it was just, and literally, it was in such bad shape after the 87 quake, the CRA was just like, here, take this building, you can buy it really cheaply, you can pay us over 20 years. We literally, safety engineers, want to vacate the buildings around it. They're so worried about it collapsing. So they immediately demolished Church of the Open Door, and Scott took the Jesus Saves signs and put them on the United Artists. And I just found out that the dedication tract written by Solomon Rose, who was the director of Hebraic Studies at Church of the Open Door, dedicating the second Jesus Saves sign to his wife and the Jewish community of Los Angeles. Yeah, he paid for it, yes, because he didn't want to offend the Jewish community. He wanted them to know, and he knows, as a Jew and a scholar of the Tanakh, he knows that Jesus is a bad word, and he wanted to ask them to forgive them, the Jewish community, for bringing up a bad word. I'll send it to you. It's really good.
Are the signs going to be...
He converted to Christianity. He was a Tanakh scholar. He was in the yeshiva, and in 1900 he said, "Oh, I'm going to convert to Christianity." And he's not in the Torah. Eastern Columbia, Claud Beelman, 1930. Robin's egg blue is the dominant color of the blue. That is the color Gladdy McBean officially uses to describe the predominant, the blue that dominates the facade. Robin's egg blue. The Sun Realty building was slate green. There is some green in this, but the predominant blue, there's a lot of green. But the blue that predominates, they call Robin's egg green. Robin's egg blue. What?
That's right.
Yeah, that's drain.
So
That
it's going to
bronze.
come right down on people's heads.
It's a drain.
Yeah, I got it.
The gold is baked into the terracotta. The gold is part of the ceramic glaze. You could still lose it. All right, what's interesting about the Eastern Columbia, and this is the 9th and Broadway building, which is also Claud Beelman, the same year, 1930. So this guy was right, my God.
Everywhere.
He was no. All right, so what's really interesting about these two buildings is that, and we can, so this, I didn't want to, it's quiet down here and we're in the shade. Anytime you look at the Eastern Columbia, the salient aspect of the Eastern Columbia is the clock tower, right? Salient aspect. The 9th and Broadway building was 6 months earlier. It also has this giant tower atop of it, which doesn't have a clock. What happened is Beelman was working with the structural engineer, and the structural engineer decided, because Beelman had asked him to spend time thinking about it, the structural engineer decided it was cost efficient to move all of the heating from the basement onto the rooftop. So in particular with the Eastern Columbia with its clock tower, you get to you have a height limit, right? You can only go 13 stories. But Beelman's office worked with city council and the city attorney, and other architecture firms had precedence for this. Utility, you can see this on the United Artists building. On the Oviatt building, it's the elevator machinery. You can have towers that are set back from the roof line, and as long as they're set back a certain amount, and these are, you can go up more. So all the heating and all the elevator machinery for this building were put on the roof, which gave it another six stories.
Down here was all great.
Exactly, and then the basement was then converted into a restaurant. So the basement, which for most buildings is going to be utilities, your boiler, whatever ventilation you have, machinery for the elevators. They put it all on the roof, and they got another 6 stories, which gave them the clock tower, which gave them the basis on which to append the neon clock. And the 9th and Broadway building does it too with the tower, but they don't have a clock, and it's not as obvious. But it was at the time it was really revolutionary in 1930 that they got more height out of a building and gave it a salient feature that stood out of all the others.
You can't see it from here, but there's a tower on top.
There is a tower on top of it. Yeah. Well,
Ziggurat stuff.
yeah, the towers. Yeah, it goes back. It's a bit back. It's closer to the Orpheum. So let's see. Salient aspects of Broadway. We talked about the terrazzo. We've got some great examples of street lights. The height limit, really, all these buildings were built during this height limit, which was 13 stories, and it really gives the street a uniformity, which is really fantastic. And that's bronze. Across the street, it's terrazzo, it's Claude Beelman, but it is the beige. It's similar in beige to the Harrison Frank building, which was just south of the Emerald building, and the green you see, that's their degree, that's the patina on bronze. Those are bronze, or that's bronze ornamentation. That's just patinaed very nicely. I know it's getting a little late, but if you don't mind, I'd like to walk back through Hamburgers and talk about the Garfield building on the other side on Hill. If everyone's, or even if you're not up for it. I know there are those that are up for it. So are there any questions? Let me look at my notes. Make sure I didn't forget
I just
anything.
wanted to make a comment. If you want to see the top of these 2 buildings, you can go up to the top of the Ace Hotel now and get a great view.
Maybe we could let me spend a minute on the Ace Hotel. Thank you. Ace Hotel took over the Texaco building. They converted the office space into hotel rooms. They now do shows at the theater, at the former United Artists Theater. Kim, do you want to talk about the Ace Hotel for a second? No? Okay, I will.
Wait, Richard,
Yeah.
before you go on, you should tell people to walk down a little bit here and look right here.
Oh, is it? Can we see inside? Well,
Yeah, this is so cool.
yeah. Well, let's just look inside this alcove. Oh, yeah. One last thing. This building, this entryway right here. This entryway used to be a private pedestrian throughway to Hill Street. So, I just found this out. I didn't want to bother these people. Does everyone see that there are giant doors at the other side of this lobby? When the building was designed, very much like the Mercantile Arcade between 6th and 5th, this was a retail pedestrian shop pathway. So these doors were closed at 10 p.m. and opened at 6 a.m. and they had retail, there was an arcade that went all the way through that had, so it wasn't just a lobby, it was a series of retail shops that you could get to. And that was gutted in the 1960s. Vacancy in these buildings, oh yeah, it's vacancy. Right, let me take a sip of water. All right, Eastern and Columbia were separate men's haberdashery firms that were started by the same gentleman, Aldo Sartori, a nice Jewish dry goods merchant from Galicia in Poland. And he came out and he started 2 separate companies, and they both were very successful. when he built this building, he combined them. And this building was a department store when it opened in 1930, and Eastern and Columbia were here as department stores. And then in 1960, they closed, and the companies went out of business, and they converted the department stores into office spaces. And so in 1960, they shifted, and by 1970, I think they had a 20% vacant occupancy rate, a 20% occupancy rate in 1970. So the building really had fell on very hard times. One of my favorite films, Inside Moves with John Voight. This is the building. In the opening scene, he tries to kill himself. Thank you, John Savage. Inside Moves, great film. Inside Moves. It's a basketball film, which is weird for me because I hate basketball, but it's a great film. It's not really about basketball, but so yeah. And this was a walkway. This is a retail. It was a shortcut to Hill Street. This was always offices, 9th and Broadway, and this is owned. The Needleman family that owns the Orpheum, they own the 9th and Broadway building. Their offices are in. It's a great building. If there aren't any questions, let's backtrack to hamburgers, almost to where John is, not quite to where the painter is. Let's backtrack and we're going to cut through hamburgers. 5 seconds.
He's always dropping stuff.
By the way, so the special edition.
This guy has the best. This guy was in the chocolate shop for a while.
The building will not exist in its current state for more than 5 years, probably. In the next 5 years, it will be sold. So when Moishe Hamburger and his dad, by the way, Moishe lived at the Los Angeles Athletic Club, the old Los Angeles Athletic Club near Felipe's, before they built the one at 7th and Olive. He lived there too, but he lived at the old the old Sturm block. So
Wasn't restricted?
no, it wasn't. The Los Angeles Athletic Club integrated for African Americans in the 1960s, and from its charter, from the beginning of its charter, Jews were always members. So there was never anything explicit in their charter prohibiting Jews from joining. But there was a clause explicitly added after the Topeka Brown versus the Board of Education. After the Supreme Court made the decision about the 14th Amendment, they added an addendum to their charter saying that they, of course, don't discriminate based on race, and African Americans were able to join the athletic club. How many people know about the City Club on Bunker Hill? Yeah, when Mayor Tom Bradley was elected mayor, every mayor up until Tom Bradley, if they weren't already members of the Jonathan Club and California Club, were automatically given membership, because if you're not a member, they want you to be because you're mayor of Los Angeles. Do you think the Jonathan Club let Mayor Tom Bradley become a member? That's right, they didn't. So Mayor Tom Bradley started the City Club on Bunker Hill.
That'll teach him.
Yeah. So he started the City Club, which is, I mean, the City Club. It's a businessman's lunch group, basically. But it's important in that Tom Bradley waited for the invitation, never got it. Okay. So this building. So Alfred Rosenheim is the architect. It was about three-quarters of a million square feet when it opened in 1906. 8 floors. In 1923, John Parkinson did a 11-story addition just to the south of here, and that brought up the square footage to 1 million. This is a giant store. It was a department store, so you just had, it was all open, and the only lighting was on the sides, and they didn't really worry about that. This building has been sold 2 or 3 times since the 1970s, and every time they sell it, there's an article in the LA Times that the renaissance of downtown is here because this building has been sold, and they're going to convert it, and whatever the au courant of the day craze is going to move in and the neighborhood's going to change. It was determined the last time they sold the building that the only way anyone would develop the building is if they were able to cut a hole in the middle of it and put in an atrium. And the last time the building was sold, the Conservancy would not sign off on this notion, and they couldn't get support of the Cultural Heritage Commission. There, I said it finally correctly. They couldn't get support of the Cultural Heritage Commission, so the last time the building was sold, it was sold without the ability, without historic resources giving them permission to cut a giant hole in the middle of the building. I've talked to the men selling the building, and I haven't pressed them on the point, but it seems like the Conservancy has agreed that if the building sold, they would approve of such a measure, which means they could go to the CHC with a letter from the Conservancy saying that, and they'd probably get it. So and I actually agree with it, having been now on every single floor of this building, that you really, no way, if you could punch a giant hole in the middle of it, you would actually do really well. That would actually really help this building, because it's very dark. And
I hope they save the escalators, though.
Yeah, the escalators are pretty interesting.
Is that them over there?
Yeah. These escalators, if you go to John Bengstrom's blog, John Bengstrom's blog is the Harold Lloyd historian, Silent Echoes. Silent Echoes. He has a blog post on the elevators in this building. Escalators. The escalators. These were the first escalators in Los Angeles, and there are several early silent films that feature these escalators. Let's go talk about the Garfield, and then on the way back, if you want, you can take a walk on your own. Don't touch the escalators if you go up there. They're interesting.
They're sticky. You can peep in and see them though.
Building in all of Los Angeles. Saddest building in all of Los Angeles. Thank you, Kim. Sorry.
You're welcome. I'm just trying to be helpful.
Okay, this is the saddest building in all of Los Angeles. The Garfield. Claud Beelman, also 1930. He was really busy.
He had a big
But also you have to understand, because I'm not giving you construction start times, the 9th and Broadway building took a year to build. The Eastern Columbia building was 18 months in the works. The Garfield, I think, was 2 years in the works. So when these buildings all opened in 1930, they didn't start at the same time. The Garfield is the saddest building in all of Los Angeles. This building has been closed to the public since 1990, I believe. It changed hands in the late 80s. It is now exclusively used for filming. About 4 years ago, there was a sting operation, and they figured out that contractors involved in filming had gone in and stripped all the copper out of it.
It was a bunch of meth heads from the desert.
Well, people had gone in and stolen all the copper wiring, which means at least a decade ago, someone had gone in and stolen all the silver applique in the lobby, which was famous. The marble. Beelman did this. I was going to bring a photo, but I couldn't do it. The photo of the lobby is unbelievable. Nickel. All the elevators are trimmed in nickel. They came up with a special amalgamation of silver and nickel to do applique in the terrazzo floors. They had marble wainscoting. No, I'm sorry. They had marble. The entire wall were solid marble in let me get my notes out. Don't need my notes. 71 quake. 71 quake hits. Building, the lobby, the marble in the lobby cracks. Not structural, but they have these giant 10-foot high by 30-foot slabs of marble that they put in, and there are cracks in them. The building sold. I'm going to get my notes out because I want to say his name, because I want everyone to say a bracha for him. So the guy's name, Jordan Grinker. Okay? Remember Jordan Grinker. He was one of 3 men that bought this building right before the quake. Quake hits, structurally building and safety signs off to say your building's fine, don't worry about it. His 2 partners say, you know what, we bought this building to demolish it. This is a sign from God that we're supposed to demolish it. Something about the quake, Jordan Grinker, something clicks. He says, no, we're going to save this building. We're going to sink $1 million into restoring this building. People are downtown, they're going to stay downtown, and they're going to want to move into this building, their office, because we're going to restore this beautiful Art Deco lobby, and people are going to be really proud. And the reason I said wainscoting is there was a lot of ornamental damage to all the floors, to the marble in the upper floors, and so what happened is they took out the full marble walls and cut it in half to wainscoting and used the marble that they took out in the lobby to do fill in work for the upper floors. And about 12, 13 years later, they are at 30-40% occupancy, and they threw in the towel and sold it. But and by 1990 it was closed. It is owned now by a group out of New York City. I used to fax them every 3 months asking permission to get in, and after 2 or 3,
right off on their balance.
yeah, I guess. I mean,
Totally empty right now?
It's totally empty.
It has been for 20 years.
It's been empty for 20 years. Like I said, 4 years ago, they figured out that someone had gone in and stripped all the copper for the wiring, which means the lobby's been gutted, right? 10 years ago, right? If not sooner. I mean, this is the saddest building. It's gorgeous. The ground floor, as you can see, has been totally redone. They've just put some crummy, vertical marble cut out. You know, they got these little marble tiles that are like 4 inches by 1 inch. It's a gorgeous building. I couldn't bring myself to bring a photo because it's got a tower. Of course, it's got a tower. Right. That's the elevator, and the heating is in that tower.
Were you thinking of Trivets?
What was it named after, Garfield?
Garfield was one of the financiers.
Was it offices?
Yeah, it was offices. It's a gorgeous building. It's been closed up. It's really, really sad.
And we just want people to keep it on their minds and keep an eye on it. 'Cause
It just seems like
it seems invisible in its way.
It is
how can they
invisible.
afford just to let it sit there doing
I don't
There's a lot
know.
of buildings
And
like that
if you
downtown.
email me, I'll get you the name of the company that owns it. But you know, I used to fax them every 2 or 3 months for 2 or 3 years, and they just don't. They don't care.
How much would it cost to bring that back?
I don't know. I mean, I know.
Copper wiring?
These days, you think if just the land itself
Yeah.
Right.
would be worth so
I
much.
don't know.
Who cares about the building for the money they can get for it?
Right. I
Like that.
just hope that it gets saved. I hope that whoever owns the company that owns it now sells it, and a developer buys it, and
Yeah, with all the
there's something
redevelopment.
left. I know. It's not a. I talk to former directors of policy in the CRA all the time, and this isn't on anyone's. You never hear anyone talking about the Garfield. Like former policy directors of CRA talk about this building. Like you interview them for the podcast, and you say, "Okay, Donald, it's 2014. We're on Broadway. What's the last great prospect?" And they say this building. And you say, "What about the Garfield?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, the Garfield. I don't know." No, people don't talk about the Garfield, so it's weird. It's weird. You talk to people and they say, "Oh yeah, like the building that looks like the Parthenon." I've heard people talk about that building for 5 years. You ask someone who's in the know about development, like, "Yeah, and the Merrill Building. Keep an eye on the Merrill Building." So watch, but you never hear about this building. So that's it. That's the tour. Yay!
Thank you.
Don't forget the Garfield building. Jordan Grinker.
It has a nice awning that you can admire from the
Drinker.
outside. Right, on this side.
That's a lot of square feet.
There's a great
Right.
Jordan.
It's a massive house.
Oh, one last thing, Jordan Grinker. Oh, one last thing. I'm still working on this. I only thought to write a Houdini historian a couple days ago. You need a sip of water to do this. You'll like this. In 1987, an escape artist hung out, was pushed out on some kind of winch out one of the top floors of the Garfield building, over 8. Okay, so they opened up one of the central windows on the top floor, and they stuck him out on a winch. He was in a straitjacket. He was in a full-body straitjacket, and he was hanging upside down. And he got himself untied, and
I think you're better off in the straitjacket.
he got himself out of the straitjacket and undid the restraints on his feet and safely climbed back in. The article in the paper that I found with the photo, the copy accompanying the photo says he did it in imitation of Harry Houdini, who did the exact same feat on that spot in 1915. Well, right. So when I found this article 2 years ago, I thought that makes no sense. I was too busy to look into it. So a couple days ago, I've been meaning to sit down. I spent 20 minutes thinking about this. So that building wasn't there in 1915, right? Garfield's 1930. So there's a small 2 or 3 story structure there in 1915. So no one's going to hang out of a window of a 3-story building. Okay. He was at the Palace Theater in 1915. Harry Houdini came to Los Angeles, and it was the original Orpheum, not the Orpheum we just saw there, but the movie theater, the old movie theater right next to Cafe Figaro was the original Orpheum. That's now the Palace Theater. In 1915, Harry Houdini performed there. So it's what they probably meant is he was hung out of one of the top floors of the Palace Theater. But what's interesting, where the vault is, used to be the RKO Theater. Okay, big movie theater. In 1924, that space opened as the Hillside Theater. From 1924 to 1931, the Hillside was the last vaudeville house in Los Angeles. Not done with this thought. Well, that's interesting. You've got the last vaudeville house in Los Angeles at this corner. That's really interesting because, we can see the Sun Realty building, right? Can everyone see the Sun Realty building? Okay, so in 1930, the Continental Hotel sat directly across just east of the Sun Realty building. And everyone can see that, right? Okay, the Continental Hotel was the last vaudeville rooming house in Los Angeles. Buster Keaton's dad lived there with all of his friends, right? All the great vaudeville performers in their 60s and 70s lived at the Hotel Continental. Okay, and they lived there because the Hillside Theater was right here. The last vaudeville house in Los Angeles was 1 block away. In 1930, Mr. Lutz decides to, even though Bullock's Wilshire's open and Bullock's is leaving downtown, Mr. Lutz says, no, it's our manifest destiny to buy as many buildings on Hill Street as we possibly can and expand the footprint of Bullock's as close to Pershing Square as we can. And they buy the Continental Hotel and they evict everyone. And Buster Keaton comes down with a couple other of his actor friends who all have dads living at the Continental who are in their 70s, and they convince the managers of the Yorkshire Apartments on Broadway to let the manager of the Continental take over, and all the Altacockers in the Continental move into the Yorkshire Apartments. So Buster Keaton's dad died in the Yorkshire Apartments. It took me 3 years to put all these pieces together, but you just think, yeah, I know. And I'm sorry, he didn't die there. 2 months before he's died, his wife, who never divorced him but threw him out of the house 20 years earlier, took him back in, and he died at her house in Venice. But his last proper residence was the Yorkshire, and he get very, very, very sick. And the last 2 months of his life were spent in Venice at his wife's house, his estranged wife's house. I think Buster was in England. No, Buster didn't come see him. Buster's mother died when he was filming in England in the 50s. And he was very sad that his mother died when he was out of country. That's it. Joe Keaton. That's my tour.
Thank you, Richard.
Remember the Garfield. It's a very sad building. All right, let's let's walk past. I'll remind you of that entrance to the upper floors.
I've downloaded. I got it on my Kindle. But after having been on your,
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.
but having been on your Raymond Chandler tour, that's why.